Ladies and gentlemen, Alapa, welcome to each and every one of you to Harry's Deepenings, where we are studying some answered questions. We will carry on with our reading, and we were reading about a need for an educator, and Abdul Baha was then going through some of the manifestations of God, describing them as a universal educator and how man very much needed this. Chapter 8 is about His Holiness the Bab.
As for the Bab, may my soul be his sacrifice. It was at a young age, that is, in the 25th year of his blessed life, that he arose to proclaim his cause. Among the Shias, it is universally acknowledged that he never studied in any school, nor acquired learning from any teacher. To this, the people of Shiraz, each and all, bear witness. Nevertheless, he suddenly appeared before the people, endowed with consummate knowledge, and though but a merchant, confounded all the divines of Persia. Alone he undertook a task that can scarcely be conceived, for the Persians are known throughout the world for their religious fanaticism. This illustrious being arose with such power as to shake the foundations of the religious laws, customs, manners, morals, and habits of Persia, and instituted a new law, faith, and religion. Though the eminent men of the state, the majority of the people, and the leaders of religion arose one and all to destroy and annihilate him, he single-handedly withstood them and set all of Persia in motion. How numerous the divines, the leaders, and the inhabitants of that land, who with perfect joy and gladness offered up their lives in his path and hastened to the field of martyrdom. The government, the nation, the clergy, and prominent leaders sought to extinguish his light, but to no avail. At last his moon rose, his star shone forth, his foundation was secured, and his horizon was flooded with light. He trained a large multitude through divine education and exerted a marvelous influence upon the thoughts, customs, morals, and manners of the Persians. He proclaimed the glad tidings of the manifestation of the Son of Baha to all his followers and readied them for faith and certitude. The manifestation of such marvelous signs and mighty undertakings, the influence exerted upon the thoughts and minds of the people, the laying of the foundations of progress, and the establishment of the prerequisites of success and prosperity by a young merchant, constitute the greatest proof that he was a universal educator, a fact that no fair-minded person would ever hesitate to acknowledge.
Thank you, dear Pete, indeed. So I thought we would go into this a little bit more. I assume the majority of people who are watching this or being part of this are Baha'is, are followers of Bahá'u'lláh, but perhaps there are some who are not. And it's worth reminding ourselves as to who His Holiness the Bab was. And as we do this, we see that the Bab was 25 years of age when he arose to proclaim his cause. And he was not given a formal education, but displayed this incredible knowledge, which the divines of Persia could not contend with. Despite the religious fanaticism of the Persians, he shook the foundations of their understanding of their religious laws, their customs and morals, and brought in a new faith, with countless clergy and leaders of thought and the Persian inhabitants taking up his new faith, willing to give up their lives for it. However, there were also many in the government and the clergy who had worked the people to go against the Bab and try and have him killed and have every trace of his faith removed. They, however, failed to do so, and he started to transform many in Persian society and then prepared them for the coming of His Holiness Bahá'u'lláh. Ultimately, he was martyred, of course, but his faith carried on. And his achievements, Abdu'l-Baha is saying here, leave no room for doubt to the fact that he was indeed a universal educator. So what we'll do now is briefly look at the Bab's mission, rank, station, his declaration, and Baha'u'llah's description of him, just to remind ourselves and again understand who the Bab really was here. So we'll look at the Bab's mission.
The Bab's mission. The forerunner of the faith was Mirza Ali Muhammad of Shiraz, known as the Bab, the Gate, who proclaimed on May 23rd, 1844, his twofold mission as an independent manifestation of God and herald of one greater than himself, who would inaugurate a new and unprecedented era in the religious history of mankind.
There we have it, the whole picture. We have this twofold mission, an independent manifestation of God, and the herald of one greater than himself, by Shoghi Effendi in God Passes By. Let's move on to his rank and station, Pete, please.
That he was not merely the precursor of the revelation of Baha'u'lláh, that he was more than a divinely inspired personage, that his was the station of an independent, self-sufficient manifestation of God, is abundantly demonstrated by himself, is affirmed in unmistakable terms by Baha'u'lláh, and is finally attested by the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha. Nowhere but in the Kitab-i-Khan, Baha'u'llah's masterly exposition of the one unifying truth underlying all the revelations of the past, can we obtain a clearer apprehension of the potency of those forces inherent in that preliminary manifestation with which his own faith stands indissolubly associated.
The Kitab-i-Khan is a defense of the Bab's dispensation that Baha'u'lláh had written to the Bab's uncle. It speaks about his mission, and here the Igan is defined as Baha'u'llah's masterly exposition.
A claim to be no less than the mouthpiece of God himself, promised by the prophets of bygone ages, the assertion that he was, at the same time, the herald of one immeasurably greater than himself, the summons which he trumpeted forth to the kings and princes of the earth, the dire warnings directed to the chief magistrate of the realm, Muhammad Shah, the counsel imparted to Haji Mirza Akazi to fear God, and the peremptory command to abdicate his authority as Grand Vizier of the Shah and submit to the one who is the inheritor of the earth and all that is therein. The challenge issued to the rulers of the world, proclaiming the self-sufficiency of his cause, denouncing the vanity of their ephemeral power, and calling upon them to lay aside one and all their dominion, and deliver his message to lands in both the East and the West. These constitute the dominant features of that initial contact that marked the birth and fixed the date of the inception of the most glorious era in the spiritual life of mankind. God passes by.
This is the inception, it says, of the most glorious era of the spiritual life of mankind. Now imagine if we'd lived some 250 years ago. We would have missed it, but by the grace of God, we are able to see this faith, and we've appeared in the most important moments in 500,000 years. And if we realize the priceless opportunities that we have, the efforts that we're able to make to serve the cause in this way or sacrifice ourselves in any manner, well, really, if we were to truly realize that, we wouldn't hesitate for an instant if we knew the greatness of it, if we really were to understand it. Now, somewhere Abdu'l-Baha, and I don't have the actual quote, sorry to hand, I apologize, says that the acts done in this day are worth more than 100 times than it will be after 100 or 200 years. So we have a very unique opportunity to react to the coming of a new day. And His Holiness the Bab had sent correspondence to Muhammad Shah, the King of Iran, and likewise to the Prime Minister, Haji Mirza Agassi, telling them to actually direct their powers towards bringing about and unifying Persia and in fact, the planet, and to perhaps leave their ephemeral power and deliver the message to the entire planet. And had they have done that, I wonder what world we would have been living in today. And then finally, let's look at Baha'u'llah's description of him as well.
Where else, if not in the Kitab-i can the student of the Babi dispensation seek to find those affirmations that unmistakably attest the power and spirit, which no man, except he be a manifestation of God, can manifest? Could such a thing, exclaims Baha'u'lláh, be made manifest except through the power of a divine revelation and the potency of God's invincible will? By the righteousness of God, were anyone to entertain so great a revelation in his heart, the thought of such a declaration would alone confound him. Were the hearts of all men to be crowded into his heart, he would still hesitate to venture upon so awful an enterprise.
Look at what he achieved. He had managed to achieve incredible things. And is it possible for a second that he was just a mere man? Is that in any way, shape, or form possible? Again, we'll leave it to reflect upon that. So, Terry, your hand was raised earlier. Was there a point you wish to mention on this before we go on to the next chapter?
I just wanted to make a brief mention about the Bab's innate knowledge. It just reminded me of a story of Jesus of Nazareth when he was 8 years old, appeared in front of the Pharisees and was able to argue his point to the religious leaders at that time. And it's quite interesting that the Bab was able to demonstrate innate knowledge at such a young and precocious age. Of course, if anybody wants any details of such incidences, that I suggest they read Dawnbreakers.
Thank you very much, Terry. Yes, as a 6-year-old, he was sent back from school, and his uncle said to him, "Look, go to school, just listen, don't say anything." Thank you, Terry. Great point. Dear Furus Khanum.
I just wanted to say that the person of the Bab is as glorious as his faith. A 25-year-old young man in Persia, his connection to his wife, his connection to his uncle who martyred at the end, his connection to his teacher who sent him back home. As a person, the mystery of the Bab is so very beautiful and glorious as a 25-year-old man, and his connection to Anis, to Mullah Hussein. So I think all in all, the person of the Bab is as magnetic as his revelation.
Thank you very much, dear Furus Khanum. Absolutely, absolutely. The character of the Bab is incredible, and as we study more about the Bab, we'll be utterly drawn to him. And I think it speaks about his meekness, his mild meekness, but of course the glory that the Bab had is quite remarkable. So thank you very much for bringing that. We will continue, and we'll go on to our next installment, our next chapter, which is chapter 9, entitled Baha'u'lláh.
Baha'u'lláh appeared at a time when Persia was plunged in the darkest ignorance and consumed by the blindest fanaticism. You have no doubt read, at length, the accounts that European histories provide of the morals, manners, and thoughts of the Persians during the last few centuries, and these require no repetition. Suffice it to say that Persia had sunk to such abysmal depths that foreign travellers would all deplore that a country which had in former times occupied the pinnacle of greatness and civilization had by then fallen into such abasement, desolation, and ruin, and that its people had been reduced to utter wretchedness. It was at such a time that Baha'u'lláh appeared. His father was a court minister, not a divine, and it is well known throughout Persia that he never studied in a school or associated with the learned and the divines. He passed the early part of his life in the utmost comfort and happiness. And his companions and associates were Persians of rank rather than learned men. As soon as the Bab revealed his cause, Baha'u'lláh proclaimed, "This great man is the Lord of the righteous, and it is incumbent upon all to bear allegiance unto him." He arose to promote the cause of the Bab, adducing decisive proofs and conclusive arguments of his truth. Although the divines of the nation had obliged the Persian government to exert the most vehement opposition, although they had all issued decrees ordering the massacre, pillage, persecution, and annihilation of the Bab's followers, and although throughout the land the people had undertaken to kill, burn, and plunder them, and even harass their women and children, despite all this, Baha'u'lláh was engaged with the utmost constancy and composure in exalting the word of the Bab. Nor did he seek for a moment to conceal himself, but associated openly and visibly with his enemies, occupied himself with adducing proofs and arguments, and became renowned for exalting the word of God. Time and again, he suffered intense adversities, and at every moment his life was in grave danger. He was put in chains and thrown into a subterranean dungeon. His extensive hereditary possessions were entirely plundered. He was 4 times exiled from land to land, and in the end, he came to abide in the most great prison. Notwithstanding all this, the call of God was ceaselessly raised, and the fame of his cause was noised abroad. Such were the knowledge, learning, and perfections he evinced, that everyone in Persia was astonished. All the learned people, friend and foe alike, who attained his presence in Tehran, Baghdad, Constantinople, Adrianople, and Akka, received a complete and convincing answer to their every question. All readily acknowledged that in every perfection he was peerless and unique throughout the world. It often happened in Baghdad that Muslim, Jewish, and Christian divines and European men of learning would be gathered in his blessed presence. They would each ask a different question, and despite their varying beliefs, would each receive so complete and convincing a reply as to be fully satisfied. Even the Persian divines residing in Karbala and Najaf chose a learned man by the name of Mullah Hassan Amu and dispatched him as their representative. He came into his blessed presence and asked a number of questions on their behalf, to which Baha'u'lláh responded. He then said, "The divines fully recognize the extent of your knowledge and attainments, and it is acknowledged by all that you are without peer or equal in every field of learning. It is moreover evident that you have never studied or acquired this learning. But the divines say that they are not satisfied with this and cannot acknowledge the truth of your claim on the basis of your knowledge and attainments alone. They therefore ask you to produce a miracle in order to satisfy and assure their hearts." Baha'u'lláh replied, "Although they have no right to ask this, since it is for God to test his creatures and not for them to test God, yet their request is in this case accepted and allowed. But the cause of God is not a theatrical stage where every hour a new performance may be offered and every day a new demand presented. For otherwise, the cause of God would become the plaything of children. Let the divines, therefore, assemble and choose unanimously one miracle, and let them stipulate in writing that once it has been performed, they will no longer entertain any doubt, but will all acknowledge and confess the truth of this cause. Let them seal that paper and bring it to me. They must fix this as the criterion of truth. If it be performed, they should have no remaining doubt. And if not, we shall stand convicted of imposture. That learned man arose and replied, "There is no more to be said." He kissed Bahá'u'llah's knee, even though he was not a believer, and departed. Then he gathered the divines and conveyed Bahá'u'llah's message. They consulted together and said, "This man is a magician. Perchance he will perform some enchantment, and then we will have no recourse." And so they dared not respond. Mullah Hassan Amu, however, reported this fact in many gatherings. He left Karbala for Kermanshah and Tehran, where he provided all with a detailed account of this episode and spoke of the fear and inaction of the divines. Our point is that all the adversaries of Bahá'u'lláh in the East acknowledged his greatness, distinction, knowledge, and learning, and that in spite of their enmity, they referred to him as the renowned Bahá'u'lláh. In brief, this most great luminary appeared suddenly above the horizon of Persia, and all the people of that land, whether ministers, divines, or the general populace, rose against him with the fiercest animosity, claiming that he was bent upon annihilating and extinguishing their religion, laws, nation, and empire, even as had been said of Christ. Yet Bahá'u'lláh, alone and single-handed, withstood them all, without faltering in the slightest. At last they said, "So long as this man is in Persia, there will be no peace or tranquility. He should be banished, that Persia might again find rest." They subjected Bahá'u'lláh, therefore, to severe hardships, so that he would be forced to seek permission to leave Persia, and they imagined that the lamp of the cause would be thereby extinguished. But this persecution produced the contrary effect. The cause grew in stature, and its flame waxed brighter. It had until then spread only within Persia. This caused it to spread to other regions. Later they said, "Iraq is too close to Persia. We must dispatch him to distant lands." Thus the Persian government persisted until Bahá'u'lláh was exiled from Iraq to Constantinople. But again, they saw that he did not falter in the least. They said, "Constantinople is a crossroads for diverse peoples and nations, and there are many Persians there." Hence, they took further steps and had him exiled to Adrianople. But that flame gathered still more intensity, and the cause grew even greater in stature. Finally, the Persians said, none of these locations was a place of humiliation. He must be sent to a place where he will be disgraced and subjected to trials and persecutions, and where his kindred and followers will suffer the direst afflictions. Thus, they chose the prison city of Acca, which was reserved for rebels, murderers, thieves, and highway robbers. And in this wise, they made him associate with such people. But the power of God was made manifest. For this prison became the means of the promotion of his faith and the glorification of his word. The greatness of Bahá'u'lláh became apparent in that he succeeded from within such a prison and under such humiliating circumstances in wholly transforming the condition of Persia, in overcoming his enemies and improving to all the resistless power of his cause. His sacred teachings spread to all regions, and his cause was firmly established. In every province of Persia, his enemies arose with the utmost hatred, seizing and killing, beating and burning, uprooting 1,000 households, and resorting to every violent means to extinguish his cause. Notwithstanding all this, he promoted his cause and promulgated his teachings from within this prison of murderers, thieves, and highwaymen, awakening many of his most virulent enemies and making them firm believers. Such was the influence of his actions that the Persian government itself arose from its slumber and regretted what had been wrought at the hands of the wicked divines. When Bahá'u'lláh arrived at this prison in the Holy Land, discerning souls were awakened to the fact that the prophecies which God had voiced through the tongue of his prophets 2,000 or 3,000 years before had been realized, and that his promises had been fulfilled. For he had revealed unto certain prophets and announced unto the Holy Land that the Lord of hosts would be manifested therein. All these promises were fulfilled, and but for the opposition of his enemies and his banishment and exile, it can scarcely be imagined how Bahá'u'lláh could have left Persia and pitched his tent in this sacred land. His enemies intended that this imprisonment should completely destroy and annihilate his cause. But his incarceration became instead the greatest confirmation and the means of its promotion. The call of God reached the east and the west, and the rays of the Sun of Truth illumined every land. Praise be to God. Though he was a prisoner, his tent was raised on Mount Carmel, and he moved about with the utmost majesty. And whoever entered his presence, be it friend or stranger, would exclaim, "This is not a captive, but a king." Immediately upon his arrival in prison, he addressed an epistle to Napoleon, which he sent through the French ambassador, the substance of which was, "Ask what crime we have committed to be confined in this prison." Napoleon made no reply. Then a second epistle was issued, which is contained in the Surah-i-Haykal, and which in substance says, "O Napoleon, since thou hast failed to heed and answer my call, thou shalt lose thy dominion and be reduced to naught." This epistle was dispatched to Napoleon by post through the care of Caesar Catafago, and with the full knowledge of his companions in exile. The text of this address quickly reached all of Persia, for the Kitab-i-Haykal was sent at that time to every corner of that land, and this address was included therein. This took place in the year 1869. And as this Surah-i-Haykal had been circulated throughout Persia and India, all the believers had it in their hands and were awaiting the outcome of this address. Not long after, in 1870, the fire of war was ignited between Germany and France, and although no one at the time anticipated the triumph of Germany, Napoleon was resoundingly defeated, surrendered to his enemies, and saw his glory changed into deepest abasement. Tablets were likewise dispatched to other kings, among them an epistle to His Majesty Nasruddin Shah. In that epistle, Bahá'u'lláh said, "Summon me to thy presence, and gather all the divines, and ask for proof and testimony that truth might be distinguished from error." His Majesty sent Bahá'u'llah's epistle to the divines and assigned them this task, but they dared not undertake it. He then asked 7 of the most renowned divines to respond to this epistle. After a while, they returned it, saying, "This man is an opponent of the faith and an enemy of the king." His Majesty, the Shah of Persia, was sorely vexed and said, "This is a matter of proof and testimony, of truth and error. What has it to do with enmity towards the government? How pitiful that we have shown forth such respect to these divines, and yet they cannot even reply to this address." Briefly, all that was recorded in the tablets to the kings had come to pass. One need only compare their contents with the events that have transpired since the year 1870 to see that every prediction has been fulfilled, save for a few that remain to be manifested in the future. Moreover, foreign peoples and non-believers attributed wondrous works to Bahá'u'lláh. Some believed he was a saint, and some even wrote accounts to this effect, such as Sayyid Dawoodi, a Sunni divine of Baghdad, who composed a short treatise in which he related, in some connection, certain extraordinary feats of Bahá'u'lláh. To this day, there are people throughout the East who do not believe in Bahá'u'lláh as a manifestation of God, but who regard him as a saint and attribute miracles to him. To summarize, not a single soul, whether friend or foe, who attained Bahá'u'llah's presence failed to acknowledge and attest to his greatness. Although he might not become a believer, he would invariably bear witness to his greatness. No sooner would someone appear before him than the encounter would produce such an impression as to prevent him, in most cases, from uttering a word. How often would a bitter enemy resolve in his heart to say such and such, or to argue so and so, when he had attained his presence, only to find himself amazed, bewildered, and reduced to utter silence. Bahá'u'lláh never studied Arabic, had a teacher or tutor, or entered a school. Nevertheless, his eloquence and fluency in spoken Arabic, as well as in his Arabic tablets, would astonish the most articulate and accomplished among the Arab men of letters. And all acknowledged that in this his attainments were without peer or equal. If we carefully examine the text of the Torah, we see that none of the manifestations of God ever said to those who denied them, "Whatever miracle you desire, I am ready to perform, and I will submit to whatever test you propose." Yet in his epistle to the Shah, Bahá'u'lláh clearly stated, "Gather together the divines, and summon me to thy presence, that the proof and testimony might be established." For 50 years, Bahá'u'lláh withstood his enemies like a mountain. They all sought to annihilate him. They all assailed him. They plotted 1,000 times to crucify and destroy him. And throughout those 50 years, he was in the greatest peril. As to Persia, which to this day remains in such an abject and ruinous state, every man of wisdom, whether from within or without her borders, who knows her true state of affairs, recognizes that her progress, her prosperity, and her civilization depend entirely upon the promulgation of the teachings and the dissemination of the principles of this glorious being. In his blessed lifetime, Christ educated in reality only 11 souls, the greatest of whom, Peter, nonetheless, denied him thrice when put to the test. Notwithstanding this, behold how the cause of Christ subsequently pervaded the whole earth. In this day, Bahá'u'lláh has educated thousands of souls, who, under the threat of the sword, have raised to the highest heaven the cry of, O thou, the glory of glories, and whose faces have shone as brightly as gold in the crucible of trials. Infer then from this what shall transpire in the future. Now we must be fair and acknowledge what an educator of mankind this illustrious being was, what marvellous signs he has manifested, and what power and might have been realized in the world of existence through him.
His Holiness Bahá'u'lláh came about in a place called Iran, Persia, which was at the time certainly one of the worst places on the planet, especially considering the previous greatness it had enjoyed. There was corruption everywhere. Even if the Shah, the king, wanted to do something good, by the time it trickled down through the systems, it would be changed for the benefit of that minister or civil servant trying to bring it about. Baha'u'llah's father was a court minister, and he himself never studied in a religious school, and in his younger years he lived in comfort and happiness and was surrounded by those Persians of rank as opposed to clergy. Now, once His Holiness the Bab had revealed his cause, well, Baha'u'llah became a supporter and ultimately was thrown into the Siyah Chal, the Black Pit, which is a prison, an underground prison. You'll see there's 3 floors down. You can see the stairs here, and he was thrown into that. And he was thrown there because of an attempted assassination on the king at the time, Nasruddin Shah, by some crazed Babis. And it was here in this Siyah Chal, in this pit, where he had the interaction with the Maid of Heaven with regards to him being the supreme manifestation of God. After 4 months, he was freed, but on the condition that he would be exiled. And the first exile took place on the 12th of January 1853, where he left Tehran, going to Baghdad, arriving on the 3rd of May 1863. Then he goes on to Constantinople, or Istanbul as it's known today, 16th of August 1863, then to Edirne, or Adrianople as it was known then, 12th of December 1863, and then finally on the 31st of August 1868 arrives in Akka. Anyone who would meet him, though, they would be totally blown away if they came with an open heart and were utterly astonished by his presence. This is the Most Great House, the House of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad, and it was here that he met clergy from all backgrounds, Jews, Christians, Muslims, who would come and ask His Holiness Baha'u'llah questions, and they would all receive answers, even if it was the same questions, but answers that were befitting to them, that would fully satisfy them. The Persian divines in Karbala and Najaf sent Mullah Hassan Amour, and he went to speak with Baha'u'llah, saying, I've been sent as a representative. The clergy recognize your knowledge and some of your powers, but they realize you've done this without studying, but they are not satisfied, and therefore they've asked you to perform a miracle. Baha'u'llah explained how they have no right to do this, that God tests the creatures do not test God. But in this case, he would do it if they would come up with one miracle they all agree on, and they would sign that if Baha'u'llah performs this miracle, they would then believe. Now, the clergy were utterly terrified when Mullah Hassan Amal returned telling them this, because they thought, what if he does produce a miracle? Then we have to be his followers. And they quite enjoyed being in the position that they were in. They enjoyed a position of power as clergy and were terrified that Baha'u'lláh might indeed be able to perform this, saying that he might be a magician or something. Now, Mullah Hassan Amal realized that actually they weren't necessarily so sincere, so he ended up leaving Karbala, going to Kermanshah, and then on to Tehran. And he would tell those individuals that he met what had happened. Now, Abdu'l-Baha makes the point that the enemies of Baha'u'lláh even would agree to his greatness, but they would say that he is against the faith or against the country, and this is an accusation that His Holiness Christ also faced. They were terrified of Baha'u'lláh and the changes that he may bring and how it would affect them, so they caused him to have severe hardships, including imprisonment, and had hoped that he would leave Persia. But the persecution had carried on and he was exiled to Baghdad, as we mentioned. So he went on to Istanbul after Baghdad because he was too close to the Persian Empire. In fact, they'd asked for Baha'u'lláh back or to exile him further, and the Ottomans said, fine, we'll exile him to Istanbul. And then further on, he was exiled again because Istanbul was a port, people would come through, Baha'u'lláh was thriving, so they sent him to Edirne. The same thing happens there in Adrianople, which is the meridian glory of his revelation, in fact, and countless tablets were sent back and forth. Now, he managed to overcome his enemies even from there and transform the lives of some in Persia as the cause spread. Eventually, he is in Akka, this prison city, and they were hoping that that would shut things down, but it didn't. In fact, in Persia still, in all the provinces, they were trying to stop the faith of the Baha'is, but they were unable to do so. They were attacking the Babis, the Baha'is, but Baha'u'lláh from prison was able to even turn some of his greatest enemies into followers, even to the point where the Persian government ended up regretting what the Muslim clergy had caused. Now, some people were able to realize that Baha'u'lláh also fulfilled various prophecies that stood for 2,000 or 3,000 years, and they responded to his call to join the faith, and they did precisely that. So Baha'u'llah's faith spread across the globe despite being a prisoner, and those who met him actually realized that he was far from a prisoner, that he had this great majesty. It was from Akka that Baha'u'lláh had written to Napoleon III. He wrote twice. The first time he was ignored, and the second time he warned Napoleon that he would lose power. And the text of this can be found in the Kitab al-Haykal, the Surah Haykal, and this was shared around Persia. And the Persian Baha'is, everyone was looking to see what would happen to Napoleon III. Surely this great individual would not lose his power. But a year or later, that's exactly what happened. There was also a tablet that was sent to Nasruddin Shah, ruler of Persia, who didn't want to listen in any way, shape, or form, and to the Persian clergy. And Baha'u'lláh said, bring me a group of Persian clergy and let me speak to them. But this, of course, was not to happen. Abdu'l-Baha makes the point saying, look at the state of Persia now. Look at what's happening, how it was in such a glorious state, and now it's in a ruinous state. And in order for it to prosper, it needs none other than the teachings of His Holiness Baha'u'lláh. So if this, again, Abdu'l-Baha is making the point, isn't quite a clear-cut case as to the fact that Baha'u'lláh is a universal educator, then what is?